I want you to close your eyes for a second. Well, obviously, unless you're driving right now.
Yeah, please keep your eyes on the road if you're driving.
Right. Safety first. But imagine you are walking through this incredibly dense, swampy forest. The air is so thick and humid you can practically drink it. And suddenly, you hear the buzzing of a flying insect.
Which is usually just a minor annoyance, like a mosquito.
Exactly. But this buzz doesn't sound like a mosquito or like a bee. It sounds heavy. It sounds like a small mechanical drone just kind of hovering right above the tree line.
Oh, man, that's a terrifying thought.
You look up, and cruising through the canopy is this insect with a wingspan of over 2 feet.
It's just a staggering image to try and hold in your head. I mean, an insect literally the size of a hawk flying right over you.
It's wild. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to sort of reverse engineer one of the most baffling creatures in Earth's history. We're looking at our source material on Meganeura,
which is an extinct genus of these just massive insects from the late Carboniferous period, so roughly 300 million years ago.
Yeah, and we are going to shortcut your way to understanding not just what this biological impossibility looked like, but how it physically managed to exist at all, like without breaking the laws of physics.
Because it really should break them, honestly.
Right. And as we'll see, the very fact that this creature could fly tells us some absolute mind-bending things about the ancient atmosphere of our planet.
We really do have to completely reconstruct the world it lived in to make any sense of it. Because, an insect of that size defies so much of what we intuitively understand about biology today.
It just doesn't fit into our modern world.
No. If you try to place this creature into our modern environment, it just fails. It physically cannot function.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I want to start with the sheer awe of the discovery, because finding a bug this huge completely threw early scientists for a loop.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going back to the late 1870s and 1880s, right?
Okay.
To the coal mines of Commentry, France. And the notes mention this is the gazillion stage of the Carboniferous period.
Yes, the gazillion stage.
I know that's a highly specific geological term, but what did that world actually look like? Like, why are guys mining for coal suddenly finding giant bugs?
That's actually a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Gazalian stage was essentially this period of massive tropical swamp forests that just covered much of the land.
Okay, so just endless swamps.
Yeah, and over millions of years, the dense vegetation in those swamps died, piled up, and got compressed into the massive coal seams that we mine today.
Well, I see.
So when those French miners in the 1800s were down there digging for coal, they were literally cracking open the compressed mud of a 300-million-year-old swamp.
Wow.
And inside those layers, they started finding these massive fossilized imprints.
So they pull these giant rock imprints out of the earth, and I imagine the scientific community just kind of loses its mind, right? Who was actually responsible for figuring out what they had found?
That task fell to a French paleontologist named Charles Brongniart. In 1884, he got his hands on what we call the type specimen.
Which is basically the primary fossil used to define the species, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And this thing had 4 wings, and each wing was at least 30 centimeters long.
That is just huge.
Right. And at first, he really didn't quite know what to do with it, so he placed it in an existing genus. He named it Dictionura munnii, honoring Stephen Money, who was the guy managing those Commentry mines.
But that classification didn't stick for very long, did it?
No, it really didn't. By 1885, so just a year later, Brongniart realized this thing was far too large and just way too unique to share a category with anything else.
It needed its own VIP section.
Basically, yeah. He gave it its own entirely new genus, Meganeura, which actually translates from ancient Greek to mean large vein.
Large vein. That's oddly specific.
Well, if you look at the fossils, the wings are covered in this incredibly intricate, heavily reinforced network of veins. They needed all that structure just to support their massive size.
Got it. Now, I was reading through the notes about how these early scientists tried to categorize the subsequent fossils they found, and it sounds like an absolute taxonomic disaster.
It was a complete mess.
Like, I saw something in there about researchers naming these bugs after mythical dragons.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how the scientific process can sometimes trip over its own enthusiasm. Brongniart published this huge, beautifully illustrated monograph of these fossils in 1894.
Okay, so far so good.
Right. But then in the early 1900s, another entomologist named Anton Handlersch stepped in. And the problem was Handlersch didn't travel to Paris to look at the physical fossils.
Wait, he didn't even look at the rocks.
No, he just looked at Brongniart's drawings.
You're kidding. He just analyzed someone else's sketches.
Exactly. And, he noticed some subtle differences in the wing fragments in those specific drawings. Based purely on that, he went wild, naming completely new, distinct species.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he named Meganeura Fafnir, literally after the mythical Norse dragon, and later Meganeura Draco.
Oh, that is wild.
It turned into a complete free-for-all of people just trying to claim they discovered the next new giant monster.
But they hadn't actually discovered anything new, right?
Yes.
Because I love this detail from the source material. It wasn't until 1943 that another researcher stepped in and realized they were essentially looking at the exact same rocks.
Yes. Frank M. Carpenter finally took a rigorous look at the physical evidence, and he realized two major things.
Okay.
First, Brongniart had taken some artistic license with his drawings. He was illustrating these broken, fragmentary slabs as if they were perfectly whole wings.
Which obviously confused the guys looking at the drawings.
Right. But second, and honestly more importantly, Carpenter realized that half of these supposedly unique, newly named species were actually just the counterpart slabs of the other half.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. You crack open a rock, right? And you have an imprint on the left half and a matching imprint on the right half. And these scientists were literally taking the left half and the right half and naming them as two completely separate species of animal.
But that is precisely what happened.
That is, it's like finding the left shoe and the right shoe in completely different parts of a dark closet and proudly calling a press conference to announce you've discovered two distinct species of humans.
It really is.
That is hilarious. But seriously, how does a mistake like that happen at a professional level?
Well, you have to remember how difficult paleontology is, especially when you're dealing with insects.
Even giant ones.
Yeah, you'd think a giant bug would leave an immaculate, easy-to-read fossil. But despite being massive, Meganeura was still fundamentally a really delicate structure.
Oh, right. No bones.
Exactly. Imagine a brittle exoskeleton and paper-thin wings being crushed by tons and tons of mud over hundreds of millions of years. The preservation is often incredibly poor compared to its smaller, thicker relatives.
So it's mostly just smudges and fragments.
Right. It makes identifying specific structural differences incredibly tricky. But fortunately, Carpenter's work cleared it all up. Ultimately, he established that almost all of these, including the dragon ones, were just the exact same species, Meganeura money.
So once they finally agreed on what to call it, the next massive headache must have been figuring out how an insect this heavy actually functioned.
Oh, definitely.
Because we keep calling it a giant dragonfly, but the source material is very clear that this is actually a bit of a misnomer, isn't it?
It is a really common misconception.
Whoa.
While they bear a strong resemblance to modern dragonflies and damselflies, and they do belong to the broader overarching group called Odonatoptera.
Odonatoptera, okay.
Yeah, but Meganeura is biologically distinct. They belong to an entirely extinct order called Meganeura. Because of that evolutionary distance, researchers David A. Grimaldi and Michael S. Engel proposed a much more accurate term for them back in 2005.
And that term is griffinflies.
Yes, griffinflies.
I honestly think that sounds way cooler and much more fitting for a predator of this scale. Let's talk about that scale for a second, because it's hard to really wrap your head around.
It is.
A single wing length was 32 centimeters, or about 13 inches. So if you put two of those together with a body in the middle, you have a wingspan of 65 to 75 centimeters.
Which is well over 2 feet across.
Right. If I hold my hands out, that's roughly the width of a standard doorway.
And their body length was estimated at 60 to 75 centimeters as well. For context, that is 5 times the length of the absolute largest dragonfly alive today.
5 times?
Yeah, there's an Australian species called Pedalura ingentissima. Meganeura was 5 times longer than that.
Okay, so the length and the wingspan are terrifying. But I was looking at the notes regarding how much this thing actually weighed, and the scientific estimates are completely all over the map.
They really are.
How do we even know how heavy a bug was when all we have is a flat imprint in a rock?
That is genuinely one of the hardest questions in paleoentomology. You are trying to extrapolate 3D mass from a 2D shadow.
Right.
Back in 1982, a researcher named Michael L. May tried to calculate it. He looked at the wing dimensions and essentially calculated the absolute minimum weight required to keep the structure intact.
Okay, and what did he get?
He estimated its mass at an incredibly light 17.8 grams. He basically assumed it was completely paper thin.
17 grams. That seems impossibly light for something over 2 feet long. I mean, that's the weight of, like, a handful of paper clips.
And that's exactly what later scientists argued. In 2018, Alan E. R. Cannell revisited the math and contended that May's work was a severe underestimate.
So what did Cannell find?
Cannell looked at the structural requirements needed for wings of that size to generate enough force without snapping under the pressure. He estimated that a griffin fly of that size would have weighed anywhere from 100 to 150 grams.
Wow. Which means it wasn't just wide, it was bulky. It had real significant mass to it.
Absolutely. To carry 150 grams of body weight, you need serious anatomical hardware. Unlike modern dragonflies, which, they tend to have a thick thorax, but a very slender, needle-like abdomen.
Metal twig, yeah.
Right. Meganeura had a thorax and an abdomen that were roughly equal in thickness. It was a heavily built, very muscular creature.
If it's that heavy and muscular, it has to be hunting, right?
Yeah.
I assume a 150-gram griffin fly wasn't just peacefully eating leaves.
Oh, definitely not. It had the sensory equipment of an absolute apex predator. Fossils of its close relatives show they had these massive compound eyes that met right along the midline of their heads.
Giving them, like, panoramic vision.
Exceptional panoramic vision. Plus, they had 4 jointed legs, which are called tarsi, that were covered in large downward-facing spines.
Oh, wow. So they would essentially form a cage with their spiny legs, swoop in, and just snatch smaller insects right out of the air.
Precisely. They probably fed heavily on a smaller relative of theirs that was found in those exact same coal mines, a genus called Meganeurites.
But that raises a massive problem to me. If you're picturing a modern dragonfly darting around a pond, right? They hover, they fly backwards, they make these incredibly sharp hairpin turns to catch a mosquito.
Right, they're incredibly agile.
But the source material says Meganeura couldn't do any of that.
That's right, they couldn't. Modern dragonflies can perform those aerial acrobatics because their wings have what are called nodal flexion structures.
Nodal flexion structures.
Basically, they're specialized little hinges built right into the architecture of the wing. So when the insect flaps, those hinges allow the wing to naturally bend, twist, and deform.
Which gives them all that crazy control over their aerodynamics.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because Meganeura completely lacked those nodal flexion structures.
Completely lacked them.
Its wings were entirely stiff. I read that these structural beams in the wing, the subcostal veins, ran almost all the way to the wingtips.
Yes.
That would be like taking the flexible wing of a modern airplane and replacing it with a solid steel beam. So if it lacked these flexions and it physically couldn't make abrupt turns, how on earth did it catch anything? Was it just clumsily crashing through the prehistoric canopy, hoping a bug flew into its legs?
It's a fantastic question, and it speaks to how perfectly tailored its ecology was to its physical limits. Research on related griffin flies suggests they were not agile dogfighters.
Okay, so how did they hunt?
Well, to use an aviation analogy, a modern dragonfly is like an F-22 fighter jet, right?
Right.
Highly maneuverable, constantly changing direction. Meganeura was a B-52 bomber. It was what we call a hawker or a patroller.
So it's flying long, straight routes.
Yes. They likely flew over open forests and water sides, just patrolling in straight, fast lines. Because of those stiff wings, they physically couldn't dart around to chase a dodging target.
So they had to plan ahead.
Exactly. Instead, they relied on those massive midline meeting eyes. They had to spot their prey early from a distance, calculate the trajectory in their tiny brains, and intercept them in a high-speed straight-line attack.
So they were ambush predators of the open air.
Closing the distance and grabbing prey in that spiny leg trap before the target even knew it was being hunted.
Wow. Okay, so we have a heavily built, stiff-winged, massive-eyed interceptor missile patrolling the ancient skies.
That's a great way to put it.
But that perfectly sets up the biggest evolutionary mystery of this entire deep dive. If you have a creature this heavily built and this massive, why aren't they around now?
Ah, yes. The big question.
You've probably heard the classic trivia fact that giant bugs existed in prehistoric times because there was vastly more oxygen in the air. Can you explain why we all learned that in school?
It's a theory that absolutely dominated paleontology for over a century. It was originally proposed in 1911 by a French engineer named Edouard Harley. We call it the high oxygen hypothesis.
Okay.
To understand it, you really have to understand how insects breathe. They don't have lungs that pump air in and out like you and I do.
Right.
Instead, they have a tracheal system. It's a network of tiny, hollow tubes that open to the outside air and branch out into their bodies. They deliver oxygen directly to their tissues through passive diffusion.
So the oxygen essentially just seeps down the tubes into their muscles.
Exactly. And the physics of diffusion means there is a hard mathematical limit on how long those tubes can be.
Because it just runs out of steam.
Right. If a bug's body gets too big, the tubes have to be so long that the oxygen simply runs out before it reaches the core tissues. So Harley argued that the only way Meganeura could physically get oxygen deep into its massive 150-gram body was if the atmospheric oxygen concentration during the Carboniferous period was vastly higher than the 21% we have today.
That makes complete mechanical sense. I mean, the thicker the oxygen concentration, the further it pushes down the tubes. I can definitely see why that became the textbook answer.
It's a very elegant theory.
So what broke the theory?
The fossil record itself started throwing wrenches into the timeline. Geologists can actually track historical oxygen levels in rocks, and we know that during the subsequent late Permian period, global oxygen levels absolutely plummeted.
Like lower than today.
They reached some of the lowest levels in Earth's history, and yet paleontologists found fossils of very large griffin flies, like a genus called Arctotypus, which had an 18-inch wingspan.
Whoa.
And they were thriving in France during that exact same low oxygen period.
Wait, so the giant bugs were still around even when the oxygen dropped? That completely contradicts the idea that they needed a super oxygenated atmosphere just to survive?
It does. It completely undercuts it. And a cutting-edge 2026 study by Edward P. Snelling and his colleagues drove the final nail into the coffin.
What did they do?
They used micro-CT scans to actually measure the space occupied by these tracheal breathing tubes in a wide variety of modern insects.
Okay.
If the high oxygen hypothesis was true, larger insects would need a disproportionately larger volume of their bodies dedicated to these tubes just to keep up.
Right, the tubes would have to get thicker and thicker.
But Snelling found virtually no correlation. The volume of the tracheal tubes scales linearly with body size. It doesn't become a geometric constraint at all.
Wait, so the Snelling study basically proves that diffusive oxygen transport isn't the invisible ceiling stopping insects from growing larger?
Yep.
The whole giant oxygen-made giant bugs that everyone quotes is essentially a myth?
That is the current scientific consensus. Yes, it's a myth.
Wow. Which brings us to a much more ecological explanation. If oxygen wasn't the constraint, we have to look for what actually limits body size in the natural world.
And this leads us to the air dominance hypothesis, which was proposed by paleontologist Günter Bechley in 2004.
I was fascinated by this part of the source material. Bechley argued that it wasn't about the chemistry of the air, it was about the traffic.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture of the Carboniferous period, you have to remember what wasn't in the sky.
Okay, what was missing?
Well, there were no birds, there were no bats, there were no pterosaurs. The insects were the very first creatures on Earth to figure out powered flight.
Oh, wow.
Which meant they had the entire sky exclusively to themselves.
So without any birds or flying reptiles to hunt them from above, there was literally no penalty for getting bigger and slower.
Exactly. They entered an isolated evolutionary arms race entirely with each other. Plant-eating insects started evolving larger body sizes just to make themselves too big for predators to easily grab.
Like trying to swallow a watermelon, right?
Right. And in response, predatory griffin flies like Meganeura evolved larger bodies to keep catching the plant eaters. They just grew and grew because there was absolutely no apex vertebrate predator above them in the food chain to impose a size limit.
They were just king of the castle. But then, what eventually took them down? If they were the undisputed kings of the sky, why did they go extinct?
Bechley's model answers that beautifully as well. The eventual extinction of the giant griffin flies correlates directly with the evolution of the first flying tetrapods.
Oh, the vertebrates show up.
Yep. Millions of years later, early pterosaurs and eventually the ancestors of birds took to the skies, and the game changed instantly.
Because they were just built better.
These new vertebrate flyers had lungs, they had hearts, and they had internal skeletons. They were immensely more agile. Remember those stiff wings we talked about on Meganeura?
Right, the B-52 bomber jets versus the F-22 fighter jets.
Exactly. The griffin flies simply couldn't outmaneuver a pterosaur. The vertebrates outcompeted them for food and ultimately hunted the giant insects to extinction. The reign of Meganeura ended not because the air chemistry changed, but because they simply lost their dominance of the sky to better engineered flyers.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
They basically just got outflown.
They did.
But before we write them off entirely, we still have to address one final glaring physical problem.
Right, the heat.
Yes, because even if predators weren't an issue and oxygen wasn't the ceiling, physics still poses a massive hurdle. We are talking about a 150-gram bug violently flapping a 2-foot wingspan. How did this thing fly without literally cooking itself from the inside out?
This brings us to thermoregulation, which is arguably the biggest engineering problem for biological flight. Muscle contraction generates a tremendous amount of heat.
Like a car engine running.
Exactly. Modern insects manage this carefully, but if you scale an insect up to 150 grams, its volume increases much faster than its surface area. The exoskeleton traps all that heat inside. Flapping those massive wings would theoretically boil their internal fluids.
I saw in the notes that Michael L. Maso, the same researcher who underestimated their weight back in the 80s, he tried to solve this heat problem with a couple of behavioral theories.
We did, yeah.
He suggested they might have been endothermic, meaning they actively pumped fluids around their bodies to cool down, kind of like the radiator in that car engine.
Right.
Or he thought maybe they were crepuscular, meaning they only hunted at dawn and dusk when the air was cool enough to prevent overheating.
Yes. Alan Cannell's 2018 study, which gave us the accurate weight estimates we discussed, also thoroughly debunked both of those behavioral theories.
And the crepuscular idea really falls apart based on what we already talked about, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if their entire hunting strategy relied on massive compound eyes to spot tiny prey from a distance, they couldn't hunt in the dark. They needed bright daylight to function as visual interceptors.
Precisely. And the ancient tropical swamps were incredibly hot, even at night anyway, so it wouldn't have offered much cooling relief.
Good point.
Cannell also dismissed the endothermic radiator idea, noting that their respiratory airflow simply wasn't robust enough to dump that much heat quickly.
So if biology couldn't solve it, what did?
Cannell realized the solution wasn't biological at all. The solution was atmospheric physics. We dismissed the oxygen debate earlier, but Cannell focused on a completely different metric of the ancient atmosphere: air density.
Oh, how much denser are we talking?
During the Carboniferous period, atmospheric pressure was roughly 1.5 to 1.6 bar. Compare that to the roughly 1 bar of pressure we experience at sea level today.
That's significantly higher.
The air was physically packed with way more gas molecules per cubic meter.
So to put that in perspective, flying in the Carboniferous atmosphere was almost like swimming in a really thick syrup or salt water.
Yes.
Because the medium they were moving through was much denser, it physically pushed back harder against their wings. Does that mean the thicker air actually gave them way more lift for far less effort?
That is an excellent way to visualize it. Think about the physical effort required to tread water versus the effort required to, say, flap your arms in the air.
Right, the water holds you up.
Because the prehistoric air was so dense, every single wing beat generated significantly more aerodynamic force. Cannell ran the aerodynamics and estimated that Meganeura only needed to beat its massive wings at a frequency of about 3 hertz.
Wait, that's just 3 flaps per second?
Exactly. Compare that to the largest modern dragonfall today, which has to frantically beat its wings at 18 hertz just to stay aloft in our thin modern air.
Oh, wow. 3 flaps a second is almost leisurely.
It is. Because the dense air did all the heavy lifting, Meganeura required far less muscular power to maintain flight. And this provides the elegant solution to the heat problem.
Less muscle power required equals less body heat produced.
Exactly. This environmental quirk perfectly solved their thermoregulation issue, saving them from overheating. They likely spent a lot of time perching on branches, letting oxygen passively diffuse into their tissues, and then launching into these highly efficient, low-effort, low-heat bursts of flight to intercept their prey.
So what does this all mean when we take a step back? I mean, when we look at the taxonomy, the massive wingspan, the dense air, and the lack of predators, Meganeura isn't just some movie monster.
Not at all.
It is an absolute masterclass in biomechanics and paleoecology. It shows us how life expands to fill the exact, specific container its environment provides. They got huge because they were the very first ones in the sky, escaping the bounds of predation, and they literally rode the physics of a heavier, denser, ancient atmosphere to grow to a size that seemed impossible to us today.
It's a powerful reminder that every living thing is essentially a perfectly tailored puzzle piece, shaped entirely by the invisible constraints of its era.
And that is so incredibly relevant to you listening right now, because our modern world is still dictated by those exact same invisible forces.
Absolutely.
Every single insect you swat away or watch buzzing around your garden today is perfectly engineered to the exact air density and the exact predator landscape of the modern Earth. They are small today because birds and bats forced them to be small to survive.
And because our thinner modern air makes flying much harder work.
Which leaves us with a rather profound and maybe slightly unsettling thought when we look toward the future.
Oh, definitely.
Because think about the timeline we just mapped out. Meganeura's reign ended because the atmosphere eventually shifted, and vastly more agile vertebrate predators took over the skies. But right now, in our modern era, human activity is rapidly altering the composition of our atmosphere.
And at the exact same time, we are witnessing a massive global decline in modern insect predators, particularly birds and amphibians.
Right. So if we are currently altering the air and simultaneously removing the predators that keep bug sizes in check, could we inadvertently be setting the stage for a brand new evolutionary era?
It's a scary thought.
Millions of years from now, long after we're gone, could the giant insects return?
It perfectly illustrates how fragile and interconnected the rules of biology really are. When you change the rules, the players change.
It definitely makes you wonder. So the next time you find yourself walking through a humid, swampy forest and you hear a heavy buzz in the distance, just be glad the air density is only 1 bar.